Today we're going to complete the Unit 2 Lesson 4, and this will be our last lesson of Unit 2. Today's topic is literal equations. And so what is a literal equation? Well, if you look at this example, 2x minus 5 equals 13, that's just a two-step equation, and we can solve that equation like we're used to solving it. But if you look over here, a times x minus b equals c, it is still an equation. It looks very similar to our two-step equation. However, there are no numbers. So when we solve this, we won't be able to reduce or simplify our numbers along the way. And really all that means is I'm going to be stuck with the same 4 letters in the final answer that I can see right now. And it's going to make it look very weird, but the process to solve it will be the same. Okay? So go ahead and let's define. A literal equation is an equation with multiple unknown variables. All right, now that you've gotten that definition written down, we are going to go through and we're going to solve each of these two equations one step at a time so that you can see how similar they really are. Okay? Now, if you see the instructions here, it says to solve each of the equations below for x. So I am going to circle the variable term that has the letter x in both equations. Okay, and I want to go ahead and isolate that. So over here on the left, I would see that minus 5. So to move it across, I will do the inverse operation, which is to add 5. Okay, 13 plus 5 is 18. Bring down the 2x. Now I'm going to go over to the right. I'm going to do the same thing. Instead of a minus 5 out here, I have a minus b. So the only thing that changes, though, is that instead of writing plus 5, I write plus b. And then that cancels. Bring down ax equals, and here is the weirdest part, okay? Before I did 13 plus 5. Because they were both constant terms, meaning they're just numbers by themselves, you can put them together. But the c and the b are not like terms. They represent different numbers, but we don't know what they are. So when I write it, I need to leave it as c plus b. Okay? Now let's do our final step. I'm going to come back to the left. 2 times x. The inverse of 2 times x is division, so I'm going to divide by 2. 2 divided by 2 cancels, and I'm left here with x equals. Let's do the same thing on the right. Divide by the variable being multiplied by x, so a times x. Well, I'm just going to divide by a on both sides. A divided by a cancels out. Okay. Here is, again, the biggest difference. 18 divided by 2, I can reduce that and get 9. I have a single number answer, which makes a lot of good sense to me. I know what 9 means. And then over here, I have c plus b divided by a, which probably makes me slightly uncomfortable because I don't really know what that means. And I won't know what it means unless someone tells me what A, C, and B all represent. Okay? Literal equations are just equations with lots of unknown variables, and the final answer will have the same number of unknown variables as the original problem did. We're actually not really solving anything. We're just reorganizing it in a different way. Okay? So what I want you to do is pause the video, and I want you to write down here what was the same about the two equations and what was different about them. And then we're going to come back in a moment and see if you noticed all the same things that I did. All right, welcome back. I have put down here that what I found to be the same about them is that they both use inverse operations to isolate the variable. What's different is that literal equations don't simplify nicely because there's multiple variables going on. All right? Alrighty, let's go look at a few examples. Today, I am not going to be completing all of the examples on this side of the paper. Some of them are going to be your classwork. All right, so I'm going to do 1 and 4 and 6 and 7 and 8. Okay, so I'll do these. Starting with number 1, A equals L times W. And over here it tells me to solve for W. Because there's so many variables going on here, I tell you to always circle the variable that you need to isolate, okay? And then also draw those rose lines, okay? So I have L times W, and I'm going to focus only on the side that has the W on it. So L times W, the inverse of that is to divide by L. So divide by L. And my answer will be W equals A divided by L. And that's it. All right. In number 2, they ask you to solve for H, which is right there. And in number 3, they ask you to solve for T. I want you to go ahead and try to complete numbers 2 and 3 on your own. So pause the video and then come back in just a minute. All right, hopefully you were able to successfully complete numbers 2 and 3. Let's take a look at number 4. Oh, and let me just stop for a minute and say that everything that we are solving for the most part today, are actual equations or formulas that you have worked with at some point in your mathematical career. Number 1 is area equals length times width. Number 2, area equals base times height. Number 3, distance equals rate times time. And then number 4, I've got interest equals principal times rate times time. These are all formulas. And with formulas, oftentimes in our science classes, it is helpful to rearrange an equation or formula like this so that you can easily plug in your numbers and then get out the information that you are seeking. So it does have a useful place in the science classroom. And later in our school year, once we start working with linear equations, we will also be reusing this quite frequently. All right? So let's just continue our practice with it for now. Okay, by solving for T. So I decided to do number 4 because most students, when they get here, they feel like there's something different going on. Okay? So I have P times R times T. Well, the inverse of multiplication is division again, but there's more than one variable there. But I am allowed to do it all in one step. So I'm going to divide by P and R at the same time. And now I'm left with T on this side, and I divided by PR is what's on this side. And that's it. I want you to go ahead, pause the video, and try number 5. All right, hopefully you were able to get V divided by LW equals H for number 5. Number 6, draw my rose line. I need to solve for R in this case, okay? So let me just say or remind you that the inverse of a square root is a square, and the inverse of a squared number is taking the square root of it, okay? But we will always need to do that step last, okay? So in number 6, I see pi divided by r squared. So I will need to divide by the pi to get rid of it first. Don't worry about changing that to 3.14 or attempting to evaluate that in any way. It is just going to stay as its symbol, just pi. So I now have a divided by pi, and then I have an r squared. Okay. The inverse of r squared is square rooting it. So I'm going to square root that and square root that. And what happens is the square and the square root will cancel out, leaving me with the r all by itself. And then here I have the square root of a divided by pi, and that is my final answer. I know it looks weird, but that's all I've got to do. If you think that you know how to do number 7 already, pause the video and give it a try. If not, I guess just keep watching because I'm about to solve it, okay? So I've got my C. I want to get that by itself, so I'm going to add S to both sides. M plus S equals C, and that's it. Let's go try number 8. I want to get the M by itself. The M is in the numerator of my fraction, okay? So how do I get rid of a fraction? I multiply everything by the denominator, okay? So now I have M equals, and you can write dV, D times V. I always put my letters in alphabetical order if possible, okay? All right, let's look at some of these other examples. So the helpful hints at the top. They say think backwards, okay, from when we did our order of operations. So you would do addition and subtraction. You would do division and multiplication next, exponents, and then parentheses last. Remove fractions by multiplying by the reciprocal. And then the last step is usually to divide whatever is next to your variable. So those are just some helpful hints for you, okay? But if you remember our notes on solving equations, it's basically the same steps, all right? All right, let's look at number 9. I'm going to do number 9 first with you because it has a fraction, and I know that y'all do not like fractions. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of that fraction first. So let me just put right here first. Do that first. So I'm going to get rid of that. The reciprocal of 2 over 1 is, of 1/2 is 2 over 1. So I'm going to multiply both sides by that. Okay, and that leaves me with 2a equals bh. Okay, and I'm still solving for the h. So my next step is to divide by the b, just like I was doing over in example 1. Divide by the b. Okay, so my answer is 2a divided by b equals h. So the key thing here was when you have a fraction like that, multiply by the reciprocal of the fraction. That should be the first step, is getting rid of fractions, okay? So the first step, get rid of fractions. Let me type it. All right, I went ahead and typed out that my first step is to get rid of fractions. I also added a list of all my inverse operations out to the left-hand side in my notes. I would like for you to go ahead and add those notes to the side of your paper as well, so that way you just have it handy when you're practicing, okay? All right, and I would like for everyone to go ahead and pause the video and try to solve number 10 on your own. All right, I've done the first step in number 10, which is to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of the fraction, okay? Please note how important it is that I circle the variable that they're asking me to solve for every time. If I didn't circle the b, I probably would have solved for h on accident because I've become somewhat accustomed to always solving for the variable that's on the right-hand side. If you look at our prior examples, that's usually the variable that I had to isolate. But that's not the case in example 10, okay? So be sure that you're solving for the correct variable. And then my answer is 3v divided by h equals b. All right, let's look at number 11. Okay, I have a fraction, so my first step is to multiply by the reciprocal of the fraction. And I'm focusing on the m in this situation. So 2k equals mv squared. Now, I know that some of you see the v squared and you're thinking that you're probably going to have to square root something. The only time that you need to square root is if the variable that you're trying to solve for is the variable that is squared. So if it was the v that we had to solve for, that's when you would square root. But since we're just solving for the m, all I need to do is move the v squared over to the other side by dividing it away. And then that's my final answer, is 2k divided by v squared equals m. Okay. Let's solve number 12 together. And then I'm going to ask you to do numbers 13 through 16 on the next page. Actually, we're going to do number 13 together, and then I'm going to ask you to do the other three on your own. All right? So I see a fraction again. The first thing I need to do is to multiply by the reciprocal, in this case, or the number that's on that bottom, which is d. So multiply that side by d. Those are going to cancel. I have b plus c, and then d times a. Well, I'm going to put them in alphabetical order. So a, d. I am solving for b here. So next step is to subtract the c. Subtract the c. So I have b equals ad minus c. And that's it. Let's go look at 13. All right, I'm solving for w, so I'm going to circle the w. If you have a highlighter is a really good way to show which variable that you're solving for without like writing on top of it like my little circles are doing. Because sometimes I forget what the variable is because I've covered half of it up. Okay. And all I'm doing is going through and circling all the variables that we're going to be solving for. Okay. Let's set up our rose lines everywhere. I am still expecting to see rose lines for everyone. All right. So number 13, it's looking like a two-step equation for me. Okay. I have 2 times w. Well, I want to break that apart last. So I'm going to begin by subtracting 2l from both sides. Subtracting 2l. So I have p minus 2l equals 2 times W. All right? Well, 2 times W, the inverse of times is divide. So divide all that by 2. Okay? And then that's it. We're finished. So if you just want to rewrite your final answer, P minus 2L, all divided by 2. Okay? At this point, I would like for you to pause the video and try to solve numbers 14, 15, and 16 on your own, and then come check back with my final answers in just a minute. All right, welcome back. Go ahead and just take a look through my work. Hopefully you're getting to the same answers that I am. If you're still struggling with it, it does take practice. If there's something that you're just not understanding, please raise your hand and ask Miss Brown. I'll try to come over and help you. If you feel like you're doing all right, let's go do numbers 17 and 18 together. These ones are a lot more tricky for students. They do struggle with these. I think mostly because of the fractions, for one, and then also because of, in this problem here, the subscripts. So b sub 1 plus b sub 2, those are subscripts. They're not exponents. The formula in number 18 is area equals 1/2 height times the base 1 plus the base 2. And that is the formula for the area of a trapezoid. And I drew a picture of a trapezoid just to kind of remind you of what that is if you weren't real sure. Number 18 is a pretty common example of what you would expect to find on your EOC at the end of the year with a literal equation. Also one that you'll probably end up seeing on your NC check-ins next semester when we're in Math 1. Okay? The formula in number 17, that is the formula for how we change our temperature from degrees in Celsius to degrees in Fahrenheit. Okay? Now, we don't actually need to really be concerned with using these equations right now. Our job is just to reorder them. All right? So for 17, my job is to solve it to get Fahrenheit by itself. Okay? So my very first step when I see fractions is to get rid of them. So I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, which is 9 divided by 5. Just flip the fraction over. And then 9 divided by 5. Okay? So that fraction and that fraction canceled each other out. I'm left with f minus 32 now. I don't have to write the parentheses anymore because there's no longer a number outside of them, or outside of the parenthesis. Okay, so 9/5 times Celsius equals Fahrenheit minus 32. My last step then to continue getting the F by itself is to add 32 to both sides. Add 32. So my equation, I'm going to give myself a little more room. My equation here is going to be 9/5 C plus 32 equals F. And I'm finished. Okay, let's go ahead and complete 18. My very first step, once I see that I have a fraction, I want to multiply by the reciprocal. That and that cancel. Now I have 2a equals h times base 1 plus base 2. And I'm going to circle the base 1 again just so I remember what I'm solving for. All right, next I have h times this parenthesis. So I need to get the parenthesis by itself, so I'm going to divide by the h. Divide by the h. So 2a divided by h now equals, so now the parenthesis is by itself. There's nothing else outside of it, so I don't have to write it again. All right. So my final step now is going to be to subtract this base 2. Subtract b2. And here's what that final answer looks like. 2a divided by h minus base 2 all equals base 1. And that is